Possessions, birds. False trail.
Hey friends, it's Joby here with a sequel to last week's video, why you should probably just play The Witcher 3 on easy. This isn't a sequel like Doom 2 though, it's more of a Fallout 3 style sequel. It's based on the same things, but we're taking it in a wild and radically new direction. This video, like last week's, will be an editorial, unlike last week's however, which was firmly focused on The Witcher 3's combat system, which I believe is bad, and others, through a process called Stockholm Syndrome, have not only become accustomed to it, but are actively defending it. This week's editorial instead will be far more rambling in nature, because I am using this video to defend my last one. The original video was a surefire hit though, wasn't it? At time of writing, 9,000 views, 118 likes, 217 comments on YouTube. It was featured on Kotaku, Australia, where it spawned another 200 comments. That's pretty good, right? Of course, there are also 164 dislikes, so it's actually about 66% disliked. I checked out the analytics and people from Australia mostly liked it, but people from Poland hated it. They just weren't fans. Polygon wrote a counter-argument article about it, and the writer, Jake Lear, made the same mistake a lot of people did. And that's what I want to talk about. The general thrust of arguments against what I said have been, I'm playing on hard and I like that, so you're wrong. Some of them accused me of being bad at games. One alleged that if Dark Souls had an easy difficulty option, I'd use that, despite the fact that I might have the only review on Metacritic that criticizes Bloodborne for accidentally offering that. Really, if you want to take my entire 17-minute, 2,600 word long rant and boil it down to a few key concepts, and many want to do exactly that, the too long didn't read is not I'm bad at the game so I hate it. The TLDR is, there is little satisfaction to be gained for playing a combat system which punishes you for the combat system's mistakes, so if you want to avoid that, play it on easy. Yes, I said the combat is bad. It categorically is. It decides when you are and are not in combat, it decides who you are attacking sometimes on a whim. You have to dodge the moment Geralt draws his sword in a cutscene because your enemy is frequently halfway through a swing when the cutscene ends. It's not bad all the time, but for some people, bad some of the time is too much. Too many counter-arguments operate on the premise that I don't know how to play the game, or that I'm bad. The Polygon article is 1,500 words attempting to explain the ins and outs of how to play the game, stating the obvious, like allowing yourself to be surrounded is dangerous and often lethal. Here's something else the Polygon article says. The hardest difficulty will mean that you'll often face undeserved deaths because of this latency, and that can be extremely off-putting, especially early in the game. Here's another from the comments below the article. I almost feel like you need to be about 300 milliseconds ahead of what you wanted to, and Geralt will feel like he's right on time. That was Jake contextualizing what he meant about the latency. Just to be clear, the person championing the concept of playing the game on Deathmarch says the game has a latency to it that is worse than you get on some dial-up connections. For further clarification, streaming video game service OnLive shut down because they couldn't make games feel good at pings higher than 100 milliseconds. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this to you as acutely as I can, but in Jake Lear's mind, The Witcher 3 has a delay of 1/3 of a second long, but that's fine and dandy because eventually you get used to it. That's the reasoning Nintendo used when selling the Virtual Boy. And Jake is arguing against me. He says I'm wrong when I say you should play the game on easy because it has flawed combat. Here's what's been bugging me about these counter arguments. They all attack the player, not the ball. And, I mean, it's the internet, so of course that's how people approach the situation. So I'm not surprised or disappointed or anything. I'm just pointing it out. I want to see an argument that actually takes what I said, not what someone thought I said, or wishes I said, or saw as the underlying meaning to what I said. Because this is the argument I made that nobody has actually dealt with. The Witcher 3 has a problem wherein its positionally contextual combat system sometimes fails to correctly analyze your target in large-scale teamfights, and this leads to players taking unnecessary and unearned damage. Enemy hitboxes aren't as precise as they should be, and Geralt doesn't move as accurately as he should, which leads to the player taking unearned damage. I guess the reason people aren't really going after this argument is because it's not really up for discussion. You either recognize that this exists in the game and you just deal with it anyway, either by lowering the difficulty and thereby removing it as a problem, or you accept that it is a problem but allow the extra challenge anyway, in which case, more power to you. I'm all about people enjoying the game in any manner they choose. I just think that you might as well just play it on easy. Or the alternative is that you haven't freaking noticed that this happens yet and you don't get to argue this point with me. Because that is how combat works in the game. It contextually analyzes the position of an enemy and changes Geralt's attack animation based on that factor, among some other things. And because of that, the game doesn't have the precision of Dark Souls. It's also not quite Batman. And because of that, I have no interest in fighting both the combat system and drowners at the same time. I don't want to fight the game and Aleshin at the same time. On the topic of fighting Aleshin though, I am playing on Deathmarch difficulty right now. And here's the thing, even if it doesn't happen all the time, and it doesn't, which is why I hammed it up in my video so I could demonstrate it occurring, each person has a threshold that, for them, acts as their own limitation. There are only so many times that I can be killed by walking up some stairs in Armor Engine games before I have to take a break from them for a few months, if you get my drift. That number, the stairs number, changes for everyone. For me, it might be 3 sets of stairs that kill me before I call it quits. For you, it might be 2. For our friend Bobbit, it might be 40, but Bobbit hasn't been too quick on the uptake since the industrial accident. There were other complaints about my video, and let's tackle them briefly. Let's see, the fighting in The Witcher 3 is realistic. I'd much rather realistic fighting than the canned animations of Dark Souls. If this is realistic fighting on Deathmarch difficulty, Geralt should not leave home. He's not equipped for what this world is set to deal out to him. These banditos are not even wearing armor, and like they're naked. And Geralt's named ancient relic magic sword does very little damage to them, while every single attack they do does quite a bit of damage despite his epic Witcher gear that he's currently wearing. It offers little to no protection. Watch how much damage Geralt, a trained swordsman and monster hunter, takes when fighting a level 3 man with a halberd. And just a note, Geralt is level 29 in this case. Next comment. The game is super easy, especially once you get past level 10 or 15 or 18. I know, I addressed this in my original video. If the game gets too easy after a certain point, then you've no reason not to play it on easy from the absolute get-go. It doesn't get any easier than easy, friends. That's the game at its easiest. There's no abrupt shift in difficulty once you reach a certain point, because you're never playing the game for challenging combat, and so you never really notice it. Next comment, or argument. You never have to search for food, that's bullshit. Look, a lot of other commenters have agreed that searching through destitute people's homes for all of their food really breaks their emotion, so it's not like I'm imagining this situation. Nevertheless, once you come to grips with the fact that all gear drops auto-match to your levels, you realize that an upgrade, or at least the equivalent of your weapon, is just around the corner, and you stop spending money on repairs, and you find yourself having broken the game's internal economy. At which point you are correct, you don't have to rob poor refugees of their only earthly belongings anymore. But you broke the game's economy, so that's not exactly a huge thumbs up. Okay, next counter argument I saw. If you play on easy, you never get to experience the depth the combat system actually has to it. This one is actually a fair comment, and I'm afraid I don't really have a counter argument to it. I don't think I ever said that combat lacked depth in the first place, and I wholeheartedly agree that the appeal is there. Going in and solving the puzzle a monster presents is a compelling element of The Witcher 3, and it's pretty much the closest The Witcher 3 gets to attaining Dark Souls style combat. And playing easy means that, except for combining a few signs to make sure certain enemies can't be damaged at all that complexity is taken away. I guess what players need to do is decide whether that payoff, the complexity that the monster fights offer, is worth the cost of playing a game with a fundamentally flawed combat system. And for me, the payoff isn't ultimately worth it, but it might be for you. And if it is, awesome. Before I address the last point a lot of people made, allow me to say something. I love The Witcher 3. I really, really do. It's a fantastic game. But fantastic games are allowed to have shitty parts. I wouldn't play BioShock Infinite if it didn't have shooter bits, which is what some people suggested that the game should do. But at the same time, I could have done without a few of the more strained shooting galleries in it. The Last of Us is a brilliant game, packed full of emotional storytelling, and it also has awful stealth gameplay. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater. Actually, that one is pretty much perfect. There's not really anything wrong there. I digress. This idea that your favorite game needs to be flawless is ludicrous, and it's actually stopping games from being better. Anyway, the last piece of criticism I wanted to address is this one. The Witcher 3 has some of the best combat I've ever played in a game. You don't like it because you suck. This one, that's probably the most common one I saw. And I addressed a little bit of it before, but yeah, let's really nail this one. Even CD Projekt Red knows the combat is flawed. Patch 1.05, which dropped for PC last week, introduces a number of fixes related to combat, and fixes an issue where the player could not deflect arrows or bolts at longer distances, and a bunch of stuff related to Geralt's movement as a player character. Basically, I was right. In essence, I was right. The combat is flawed. It has problems. CDPR knows it has problems. It is unlikely that they can fix what I see as a critical weakness in their combat system, because it's too ingrained in the basics of how the game plays. But they can mitigate it by better marrying Geralt and the player's actions. I'll say it again, I was right. Some wiener accused me of being British and of trying to be a games critic, and he's wrong on both accounts. I'm Australian, and we haven't been British for centuries. And I'm not trying to be a games critic. I am a fucking games critic. I've been one for 8 years now. I'm one of the fucking best games critics. My reviews are all over websites and magazines throughout Australia. I've been doing this for a long time, and I do sort of know what I'm talking about. I can't promise that this YouTube channel will always be quality content like my Witcher 3 combat system deep dive or my Bloodborne review. I use this channel to host a lot of experimental shit that I try out and sometimes abandon, and a lot of notes that I take in video form. But you should subscribe to my channel if you want to hear someone dig deep into what makes games good and what sometimes makes them bad. If what you want instead is for someone to congratulate you on your wise video game purchase, I'm sure Polygon has an article that will tell you exactly that.